Hey guys, welcome back. Now that you've watched the first video about the French and Indian War, you're ready to start Station 2. So in this section, you're going to be taking notes on the sheet that you received back at Station 1. Now, as we go through this video, if I'm going too fast, you are going to need to press the pause button. There are going to be some maps that you're going to have to color in. There's some information that you guys are going to have to write down. So you need to make sure that you go at your own pace. If you have questions, raise your hand and I will come around. I'm going to be bouncing back and forth between station to station. So let's get started with Station 2. So our first section is about who was involved in the French and Indian War. Now if you look at the name, it says French and Indian War, kind of seems like it would be the French against Native Americans, but that's not the case. It's actually the French versus Great Britain. Now we have France and Great Britain, but we also have the Native Americans that play a major role. So we have the Algonquin, the Mohawk, the Ottawa, and the Shawnee, who are on the side of the French. Whereas with Great Britain, they have the Iroquois Confederation, they have the Cherokee, and they have the Catawba. Now, the Iroquois Confederation is a collection of different tribes that make one large group. So Great Britain, even though it says they only have 3 groups, they really have probably about 4 or 5, almost the same as the French. The next part is when. Now, I said in the beginning of the year that I was not so concerned about you guys knowing exact dates. But you do need to know when things happen. That way you can put them in order as what happens first. So if you have a general idea of when something happens, you're able to then relate it to other events. So the French and Indian War starts in 1754 and continues all the way until 1763. Now, if you remember, I had said that the British and the French were fighting over a territory that they both had claimed. So, this war happens in British territory in North America and in New France. Now, there's a section between the 13 colonies and the land that the French owned that the British and the French both seem to think that it was their land. Now, as we're going through, when we get to the map part of the notes, you're going to see that there are a lot of waterways that are in this area where the two sides think that they own it. So if we zoom in to this little thought bubble down here, it poses you a question. It says, why is it so important for the colonial powers to claim the waterways? What is the importance of having control of waterways? Now, when we had talked about the Europeans going to Asia, we had talked that they were looking for goods. Some of you told me that they were looking for silk, for spices, and you guys had a great list of things that they were looking for. And we talked about how the waterways were kind of the roads that they had then. It was harder to travel overland, so people used ships and they sailed places. So controlling the waterways is not only a way for transportation, but it's a way for the people to bring goods, people, and ideas from one place to another. So we're going to add into our notes in this thought bubble that the waterways connected settlements, meaning it connected towns and cities, distributed goods and people throughout the area, and because of this, control over a significant waterway, so the most important places, increase as more people start to migrate to North America. Just like stores, they tend to get bigger once there's a larger population and people using those resources. So as more people increase in North America, the control of the waterways is one of the major ways that the government or the governing body of that area can maintain control over the people, over goods, and over any invaders that are coming in. Next at this station, we're going to talk about the main cause of the French and Indian War. So we're going to zoom in on this map, and what I want you guys to do is take the yellow, green, and blue colored pencils that you have at the station, and I want you to color in the map exactly the way that you see it on the screen. I want you to label where it says the British, Canada, French, Louisiana, Spanish, British colonies, all that. I want you guys to fill in all of it so that way your map looks just like this. Because looking at the map before the war starts and looking at the map that you're going to create after the war starts gives you a visual representation of how much has changed in terms of who is in control of what land at the end of the French and Indian War. So it's very important that you make your map as close to this as possible. And what I want you to do is I want you to press pause. That way you can fill in your map and you're not still listening to me talk as you do that. So take your time, fill in your map, and when you're done, hit play and we'll continue. Welcome back. Now, the main cause of the French and Indian War is that France and Great Britain are both claiming to have control over this area right next to the British colonies and next to the French Louisiana area. If you notice in the map when you filled it in, you have that spot that's yellow with green lines going through. Now that means that both of the sides believe that that was their land, that they had the right to the Ohio River Valley, the Mississippi River Basin, and the Great Lakes region. Now, again, we had posed that question before, why is it important to control these water basins? Because if you look at the map, you can see you have the Mississippi River going into the Ohio River, and all of these places are ways to transport goods and people. Now, the French and Indian War was actually a smaller part of a global war that was happening between France and Great Britain. This global war was called the 7 Years' War, and essentially it could be considered the real first world war that's happening, because now we have conflicts that are happening not only in Europe, but now over here in North America. Now you guys are going to write down the important people and important battles. You have your important people like George Washington, William Pitt, General Montcalm from the French. And then you have important battles in Fort Wilderness, Fort William Henry, Fort Ticonderoga, all these different places that we've had conflicts during the French and Indian War. I'm not going to get into too much detail about each individual person or battle, because in a later station you will learn about the most important people and battles that are on this list. So I told you before that you were going to have two maps. Well, here's the second one. Now, if you notice, you don't need any yellow because all you have is British and Spanish. So the only two colors you're going to need are going to be green and blue. Hit the pause button again, fill in your map, make sure you have all the labels that they have on here, and then when you're done, come on back and press play. Alright, welcome back. And now let's talk about the Treaty of Paris. End of a war, there's usually something that happens that is going to be a concrete piece of evidence that the fighting is over. Now, you've probably heard the term treaty before, and that's usually the type of document that both sides will sign saying so-and-so is agreeing to stop fighting, and this side gets this side gets that. It's kind of a contract, if you want to think of it in that way. So we have the Treaty of Paris of 1763. Now, here's the confusing part, because as we go throughout the year, there are going to be a bunch of different Treaty of Parises with a different date. So here's the one time where I'm really going to tell you that you need to know the date. So if you want to highlight or put a star next to the Treaty of Paris 1763, I would do so now. Alright, so the Treaty of Paris ends the French and Indian War. Now, looking back at our map, if you look back at your first map and now look at this second map, they pose the question, what European country lost the most territory? You should be able to look at your map and say, well, the French are no longer on here, so France has to be the only logical explanation to this question. So now we come to the effects of the French and Indian War. So as we saw in the maps, France loses all of its territory. They become obsolete when it comes to colonialization in North America. They are not a player anymore in the game of trying to control as much land as possible. France is essentially forgotten. Now, Great Britain, on the other hand, doubles or possibly even triples the size of the colonial territory that they have control over. Now, there's two major outcomes of the French and Indian War. So on the Native American side, we have Native Americans who fought for the French, and in the station about Native Americans' involvement, you'll understand why they chose which side that they chose, but they continue to fight for what they believe they deserve, and this leads to something called Pontiac's War, which we will talk about. Now, on the colonial side, we have Great Britain, who has large amounts of debt, meaning they owe a lot of money to a lot of different people who gave them weapons, maybe food, or any other types of supplies that they needed, and they don't have any other way to gain that money other than causing the colonial subjects to somehow pay. So they come up with a bunch of different acts, things to tax, and a bunch of different ways of gaining money for the government, and the people who are living there don't feel like that's acceptable, and they don't feel that it's really their problem to try and find that money. So it causes a lot of tension between the colonists and the government back in Great Britain, and that's one of the main reasons as to why we end up with the American Revolution. Alright, well, we come to the end of the notes station, and you need to make sure that you have two things done. You need to make sure that you have the maps all colored in and labeled, and then you also need to make sure that you have entered all of the notes that were shown in the video into your note sheet that you got from Station 1.